Good morning. Happy Sunday to you all. Thank you for joining us for another time of Sunday school where we are uh, going through the book of Revelation. This is our last lesson in our current book, although we do have our new books, and we will be continuing to go through the Revelation, but the spring quarter, the spring quarter is coming to an end. The summer quarter is about to begin, and so this particular book, this quarterly, will be finished with this lesson number 14, and then we will move into the summer quarterly. I appreciate you joining us for this in this study in Revelation. Before I get into the actual lesson, let me point this out, that Revelation and really all things concerning the end times, these are things that have not yet happened, as far as we know. And I think if they did happen, we would know. There is a lot of figurative language, a lot of things that are representative of other things that are given. These were visions that were given to the Apostle John. And so he just simply described everything as he saw them. Not everything can be perfectly understood as of yet, but the purpose of looking at Revelation is to look forward, and as these events start to transpire, that we are fully prepared for them. At the very least, we need to constantly have ready minds so that we're prepared for all of these things to happen. Okay, and that they don't catch us off guard, unaware. We know that things are going to get drastically worse before they get eternally better. But that's the wonderful thing, is they will get eternally better. All of these things just means that Jesus Christ is coming back. We get to be with him for eternity. He's going to set all things in order. And I'm so excited for that time. But we got to be prepared for what's to come. Okay. We don't know exactly when Jesus is coming back. We don't know when his rapture will be. Some think it's before all these things will happen. Some think afterward. The truth is that there's not enough clarity in the scriptures to come to a conclusion. So my advice is always, let's prepare for the end and pray and hope for the beginning. I don't know of anybody that holds to a post-trib rapture, post-tribulation rapture, that wants to go through the tribulation. I don't know of anybody that is. We all want to go out before all of these things happen. And, we continue to study. We continue to look to the scriptures. But I do think we need to be prepared for it. God has not appointed us unto wrath, but we see tribulation all around us all the time. And so who knows what might come about as a result of that. In our study today, we're going to be looking at Revelation chapters 8 and 9. Revelation chapters 8 and 9. The title of the lesson is The Seventh Seal, the Trumpet Judgments. The seventh seal and the Trumpet Judgments. Okay? Revelation chapters 8 and 9. The key verse in our text is in verse 20 of chapter 9, which says, "And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk." Okay, so leading up, in the application, the student will conclude God's righteous judgment is justified because of mankind's turning to idols and refusal to repent. God is just, therefore his judgments are always justified. Okay, he has already laid out what his judgments are. He judges sin. The wages of sin is death. By way of a first look, I tried very hard to put things into a proper perspective with everything, with so much in the book of Revelation being figurative. It's very hard to try to come to any solid conclusions on these things. That being said, I've kind of gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole this week in my study for this lesson. And I want to kind of prepare a particular thing. And I want to point out that these trumpets, 6 of which we will see in this text, and then following that will be the 7th trumpet. But in these six trumpets that we will see, the first 6, it looks like almost individual events, but if you put them all together, I think you can find really one event, and all of these are just different aspects of that same event. Now, just this month, May 18th, we didn't celebrate. Obviously, it was not a positive event, but we reflect on the eruption of Mount St. Helens 40 years ago on May 18th, 1980. Very unique eruption. It didn't erupt straight up into the air like a lot of volcanoes did. It erupted laterally, and it sent ash and gas literally all over the earth within 2 weeks. And it ultimately claimed 57 different lives. And a terrible thing, you can go back and find videos on that very thing and see exactly what happened. It was a pretty crazy thing. And I wanted to bring up Mount St. Helens as being, certainly in our country, it's the greatest volcanic eruption that I know of in our country, certainly within modern history per se. When you look at the topography of the earth, you find that there are a lot of volcanoes out there. Interestingly enough, there's what's called the Ring of Fire. I think it's also called the Pacific Rim, where dotted around the Pacific tectonic plate are many, many volcanoes. And so the reason I bring that up is because I think that what we're going to find, at least when I look at all the things in these 2 chapters and these 6 of the 7 trumpets, I think what we see is different aspects to one event that centers kind of around a volcanic eruption this world has never seen before. It seems fitting, in my opinion, that right in the middle of that ring of fire, it would be a perfect area for to see such a volcano rise up out of the earth, to see such a volcano erupt, and to see the events that we're about to see happen in these passages. That would be ideal, because right in the middle of it is the exact opposite place on the earth that from the city of Jerusalem. And why is that significant? Because we know that Jerusalem is going to be the kind of the centerpiece of the tribulation, that really all of the nations of the earth are going to gather, and they're going to gather against Jerusalem and against Jesus Christ ultimately. So if an event like an eruption happened, it's going to drive people around the earth looking for safety to be able to and really congregate, as it were, around Jerusalem. I can't say for sure concerning the Ring of Fire being, in that area that's where all of these things are happening. I'm just suggesting that it's certainly a possibility. But at the very least, I wanted to kind of put in mind the image of a volcano eruption, because I think we're going to see evidence of that here. So as we start, I want to look first at Revelation 8, verses 1 and 2, where we see the 7th seal open and the first trumpet sounded. Okay, it says, so verses 1 and 2, and then verses 6 and 7. It says, and when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And if you jump down to verses 6 and 7, it says, and to the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. So we just finished looking at 6 of the 7 seals being opened, and the events that were happening as a result of those seals open. Now we come to the 7th seal, and it seems as though the 7th seal triggers then the 7 trumpets to be sounded. Okay, and so immediately we get into the very first of these trumpets. Now, if you consider from the perspective of a volcanic eruption, it says hail and fire mingled with blood. Now, I don't think what we're talking about is literal blood. I think it's what appeared to be blood. I think what John perceived as he looked at this is that the red color that ultimately would be liquid magma from a volcanic eruption. Hail could be just stone or rock that came down from the that was erupted up in the air, and certainly fire as a result, and that they were finally cast upon the earth. So the very first part of a volcanic eruption happening, that all of those things are that it explodes, throwing just tons of rock and fire into the air, and ultimately with lava, shooting up, kind of giving the appearance of blood. I believe that's what we are kind of experiencing here. That's what John saw. It says that they were cast upon the earth, a third of the trees was burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. What kind of effect would a volcanic eruption have at the beginning concerning the earth around it? I think that's what we can see concerning this. Okay, if it's not referring to that, just keep in mind hail and fire mingled with blood, cast to the earth, the trees and the grass burnt up in some form or fashion. If it's not volcanic related, it's going to look like that. So we, at the very least, we need to know that this is what we look for if in fact we are going to be here to see these things take place. The second trumpet, in verses 8 and 9, it says, "On the second trumpet sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed." So this is kind of where I'm led to think that maybe it could be related to the Pacific Plate and the Pacific Rim, the Ring of Fire, that it goes, at the west coast of the United States, the east coast of Asia, and north of there. That's where you see all of this happening. And when you look at all of that on a map of the entire world as it's spread out, it encompasses approximately a third of the earth. And so that's kind of where my mind goes. And seeing that the sea is related, if it were to come up right in the middle of that sea. Mount St. Helens was nowhere near the sea. It was inland in Washington. Hawaii, there's a lot of volcanic activity in Hawaii. In fact, a lot of the islands in Hawaii were made as a result of volcanic, the lava, as it cooled, it built up and formed islands and so on. But and there's constantly volcanic activity. Just what I think a couple of years ago, we saw some volcanic activity continuing on those islands there. But to have a third part of the sea, a third of the wildlife, a third of the ships, to be a prominent place within that area seems logical to me. And this seems to me like a very obvious, a mountain burning with fire. What else could that be other than a volcano? And I don't believe this is a separate event from the first trumpet. I think the first trumpet is the first action of that, and then the second trumpet is the actual image of that, a volcano. Okay, but regardless, 1/3 of Earth's sea creatures it will die. 1/3 of all the ships will be destroyed. The third trumpet, in verses 10 and 11, it says, "And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." This is a very interesting portion of scriptures. Obviously, actual stars are far bigger than Earth, exponentially bigger than Earth. I mean, even our sun is one of the smallest observable stars within our universe. And so for something to be able to fall to the earth and not the whole earth be consumed, we're not talking about a literal star. I think what we may be talking about is something like a meteor or an asteroid that as it penetrates Earth's atmosphere, it comes on fire, but it's large enough to where it doesn't just burn out. Because there's a lot of, whenever you see shooting stars, those are asteroids that go through Earth's atmosphere and are burned, and a lot of those things don't actually make it to the earth. But for something to not only penetrate, to burn up, and then actually fall onto the earth, that is a pretty significant deal. So it was small enough that it didn't affect the whole earth, but large enough to where it made a huge impact, so that as a result of it, 1/3 of the rivers, of the fountains of water, were all affected and in essence poisoned, so that it killed many men as a result. 1/3 of Earth's water supplies were diminished because they were poisoned. Now, the wormwood is a very interesting thought here. The word that is translated as wormwood is actually where we get our word absinthe. So, if you can imagine the alcohol, which it's not like regular alcohol, it does come in liquid form, but it actually has hallucinogenic effects on people. And the intoxication that comes as a result is not like intoxication from other alcoholic beverages like beer or wine or something like that. It has psychedelic type of effects, right? And absinthe is made from an herb that's actually called wormwood, and it's been used for centuries for medicinal purposes. Wormwood was, but in too high of amounts, it can be toxic. And if you're talking about just consuming the water supply of 1/3 of the earth, where your only option is to drink that, it's going to have some pretty terrible effects. It can be fatal in large quantities. Well, what choice do you have? You have to drink. If you don't drink, you die. Now, if you drink it, you do die. So if we're looking at this in terms of a large volcano, it could have reference to the effect of the toxic ash that is spewed from that volcano on the water supply. So I don't necessarily see that this is necessarily a separate event. Maybe that this isn't even actually a star, but maybe a large rock. It says burning as a lamp. So if it were to have been erupted from that volcano into the air, toxic gases and ash that fall on the earth as a result of that, it could have a devastating impact. I was born a year after Mount St. Helens, so I didn't actually experience that, but I've heard stories from people saying that, the ash clouds from Mount St. Helens erupting literally surrounded the whole earth, and ash was falling all around the whole earth because of that. Okay, so imagine the effect that it would have, certainly on its nearest area. And if you're talking about a volcano like the world has never seen before, and it's going to have a very widespread effect. Once again, you can't always look at this from that perspective, but it does seem to be connected to what we're talking about, and to look at it from the perspective of a volcano eruption does seem to be, at the very least, feasible. I can't prove it, but at the very least feasible, okay? The fourth trumpet says, and the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the light and the night likewise. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. So we've now seen five trumpets, or excuse me, we've seen four trumpets, as we see here. Oops. And so that leaves three more trumpets. And these three woes, when he says, whoa, 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 it's no coincidence. It's not just repeating for emphasis. He's saying the final three trumpets are three woes that are to come upon the earth. And I mean, it seems by way of the first four that already there have been some tremendous woes, but it's going to get far worse on this earth. Okay, so the fourth trumpet is that the earth, as it says, is going to be smitten, third part of the moon, third part of the stars. And that doesn't mean that 1/3 of all of heaven is going to be, it's just that for 1/3 of the earth, you're not going to be able to see them, you know, that the smoke from this eruption is going to be so severe that an entire third of the earth is not going to know whether it's day or not night, because it's going to completely block out the sun and the moon and the stars. Okay, and then obviously we see then also the warnings for the trumpets which are yet to come, these three woes, as he says. The first of which is in the fifth trumpet, and it says, and the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. Now, it could be that this is a picture of beasts that God has made specifically for this judgment that we have never seen before. It very well could be that's what this is speaking of. And we need to be, we need to not get overly zealous about coming to conclusions on things and remember what the actual passage says. That being said, I've heard for years that maybe, that this is just from the perspective of John, not knowing exactly what he saw, but describing it as closely as he could. And maybe these weren't really locusts, because when you look at it, it's not like regular locusts. Even if you were to say it was like a locust, if you don't know what a locust is, it's in essence a grasshopper. But when he describes these locusts, it's not like locusts of the earth that we have seen. Okay, so that leads me to believe that maybe he just looks at it, and that was the impression that he received from this. That the way that the way that they appeared, the way that they flew, it just looked like locusts. And for years, I've heard it suggested that perhaps this is his perception of something along the lines of a military helicopter. Obviously, technology even then is going to be at least somewhat advanced even from our time. But imagine what John would have seen when seeing a helicopter, and especially a fleet of helicopters that are going out, and especially when you get into looking at the image of these locusts. Now, it'll get into explaining that a little bit further. It does say a star fell from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Sometimes angels are referred to as stars, because how could a star receive a key? But I believe what we're talking about here is that what appeared to be a star opened up what seemed to be the bottomless pit or hell, right? Bottomless pit is another picture of hell, which, if you look at the scriptures, hell is talked about as being at the center of the earth. So maybe it opened up a chasm in the ground that looked like it could have gone all the way to hell, and coming that spewed smoke, and then what he saw was these so-called locusts that came out. Now, I want us to remember a couple things. The idea of these locusts, that they had power as it were scorpions, that they were commanded not to hurt any sort of plant life, only those that didn't have the seal of God in their foreheads. Now, the only ones that we see who have received the seal is those of the tribes of Israel, right? We looked at that previously, how 12,000 of each of the tribes of Israel, totaling 144,000, had received the seal of God in their forehead. So it seems to me very logical to suggest that's whom this is talking about, that these were the ones sealed, that they were not going to be hurt by these so-called locusts. Okay, but let me see here. Oh, it doesn't even give the whole part of the passage. So I want to go back and I want to read. I don't have it for you, but I do want to read a greater portion of that passage, because I want to see it. For whatever reason, the lesson writer didn't include this, the whole thing in his lesson, and so I didn't include it. But I do want to look at this, the whole picture that's given here. So, starting at verse 1 from chapter 9, and the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. There came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. To them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shape of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. And their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. So that gives us kind of a more in-depth picture of this, and I want to paint something for you. This is not necessarily a proper interpretation of Scripture, but this is a possibility as far as I see it. And if you put this in context with this great mountain, this volcano eruption that it has set a tremendous amount of the world on fire, what is going to be the reaction of people to be able to put out vast areas of fire out as quickly as possible? Aircraft, they have aircraft for forest fires and big fires that will either draw up big portions of water in local lakes or oceans or rivers or somewhere where they can get a lot of water, and they will go to the source of the fire and begin to spread it so that it tries to put out the fire, or at least it cuts off a portion of the fire so it can't consume more than it will. Other types of aircraft don't use water. They use a fire retardant or suppressant. So if you can imagine, picture these, what so-called locusts, as John pictured it, if he saw one of these aircraft, especially a helicopter, its wings that sounded like horses and chariots, that it had a face like a man. And if you look at a lot of helicopters, a lot of aircraft, they have a face that kind of looks like the face of a man. It kind of has a nose to it. Teeth like a lion. Now, a lot of times, especially military helicopters, you'll see them that have, they paint on what looks like teeth, right? It looks like it has the stinger of a scorpion. Same thing if you look at aircraft that kind of has that look to it. The one that got me, that I couldn't figure out for the longest time, is how could this have the hair like a woman? And if you look at those aircraft and you go back and look at pictures or videos, whenever the water or the retardants flow down from this aircraft to be able to put out the fire, it looks like flowing hair. And the retardants are in different colors. I think I've seen red and black. And when you pour out water, it looks like it's white. So imagine all of these different aircraft. Some might be planes, some might be helicopters, but they're pouring out this liquid to try to fight the fires that are a result of this volcano. It may look like these locusts. Now, if you continue that, he says that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, nor the green things, nor any tree. What's their point? Is to put out forest fires and protect the green things, things that can go up in flame like that, from being hurt. But they did hurt these men. Now, when you look at the retardants in particular, they have elements to them that are not deadly, at least as far as I could tell, but they are irritants that they can cause. They can irritate your eyes, they can irritate your skin, they can cause like nausea. And so I don't know if there's such thing as a sickness from this, but that for 5 months, men were affected by whatever these locusts are, to the point that they wanted to die, but they didn't die. And so it seems in my mind to fit perfectly with something like that. These aircraft that have been deployed, and from John's perspective, a very ominous appearance. Could you imagine what he saw when he saw a helicopter? That's a pretty intimidating thing, and so to look at it, this is that's how it appeared to him, that all these locusts coming out of the smoke, which of course, where there's fire, there's smoke, right? They say where there's smoke, there's fire, but where there's fire, there's smoke. And so coming up from the earth, from this great chasm or whatever happened to open up what looks like, opening up from hell, that these locusts or whatever these are come out of the smoke. That's what that seems to look like to me. Now, I could be way off base here. Please don't take this as this is the appropriate interpretation of the scripture. I just think it is a good possibility. Okay, it seems to fit when you put it all into perspective like that. Okay, the sixth trumpet, and this is the final one we'll look at today. The next time, I believe, we'll see the or eventually we'll see the seventh trumpet, but the sixth trumpet in verses 13 to 16 says, "And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an angel, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them." So you see the voice coming from the four horns of the golden altar. Now, all the Bible says that the things that, you know, if you consider the things of the temple and the tabernacle, those things were from a pattern of the things in heaven. And so apparently before the throne was this altar, and they had these what looked like horns on each corner, which were used ceremonially in their sacrifices and things like that. And so from the four horns, he heard a voice coming. What that's representative of, I don't know for sure. I couldn't say for sure. You know, if you consider the sacrifice, Jesus is the sacrifice. So is this a picture of Jesus? Maybe, but I don't know for sure. Okay, but the voice came from the four horns of the golden altar, and told this sixth angel that sounded to loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And I don't know exactly what that means. Are these literal angels? As a reference to something else? Not sure. When I started looking at the Euphrates River, I came up with some interesting things. You know, if you try to think of these horsemen, and I'll look at these horsemen here in a moment. When you look at these horsemen that were loosed by and prepared by these four angels, pretty crazy picture there as well, almost to the point where it looks like it might also be something, perhaps some sort of military vehicle that that John saw, and he just described based on what he knew, not knowing what that was. But I haven't been able to find a perfect fit for that. In talking with Brother Carl today, he thought, well, what if it were something like a submarine or something like that? And I thought, wow, you know, I don't know. I think the Euphrates River is a pretty substantial river. And I know, you know, I used to live in, you know, very near the Pend Oreille Lake, or Lake Pend Oreille in Idaho. And at the southern end, there used to be a submarine base. You know, you don't think of submarines other than in the ocean. You know, and there's a submarine base in the, that I lived, I don't know what it is with me and submarine bases, but it was very near the Bangor submarine base in Bremerton, you know, in Washington, which was on the I believe it was the Hood Canal in the Puget Sound. So that's not necessarily ocean. I mean, it's ocean water, but it's not specifically ocean. So, you know, you can have submarines in places that are not the ocean. So, you know, it may be that it fits this perspective. But, you know, I'm not 100% sure, and I couldn't find a perfect look at this. But when you look at the descriptions of these, what he thought looked like horses, you know, it seems like there's something to that. When he talks about in verse 17, "And thus I saw the horses in the vision, them that sat on them having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone." By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. So, phenomenal vision. If you could imagine, put yourself in John's place to see this vision. It's just astounding what he saw, and he described it to the best of his ability. Maybe these things actually were figurative of something different. You know, we're going to see other images that he saw, and they were figurative of things. Or is it that this was just how he just saw it as it was, and this was the best description he could give? It very well could have been. But this army of horsemen, as he says, was 200,000, and if I believe that comes to 200 million. 200 million. And if it were in fact an army, imagine the United States has, what are we, around 340 million people in our population now? It's hard to say for sure, but you're talking about 2/3, an army the size of 2/3 the size of the United States population. So whatever this looked like, it's hard to say for sure. You know, whatever this really was, it's hard to come up with an answer for sure. But we need to at least keep these things in mind, knowing that it's going to come, and we very well may be in a position where we will see it, and we need to know what these are so that we can properly warn men and show men, hey, this is what Jesus showed to John. This is what the book of Revelation talked about. And especially when we consider that they were there to kill 1/3 of Earth's population, they need to be warned, right? They need to be warned. They need to know that they need to be prepared for that so that they can come to Jesus. Okay, and it talks about that those, even those that didn't die, still refused to repent of their wickedness. They saw the judgment of the earth, and they refused to repent of their wickedness. Okay, so with this being said, you know, there's not much to draw from a spiritual perspective other than the last couple of verses. Men are wicked, even in the midst of their own judgment on this earth. They're not going to turn from their wickedness, by and large. But knowing that these things are coming, that should stir us up who have already found Jesus Christ to be sharing the gospel with people. Who knows how soon these things may take place? I don't see any evidence of a timeline concerning this. Brother Carl asked me that also. He says, you know, where do you think all of this fits? And I can make some guesses, but there's just really not enough evidence to show exactly how it all fits into place. And so, but at the very least, we need to be aware of it. It should stir us who have Jesus up to share Jesus with other people, because these things are coming, whether we're here for them or not. So keep that in mind. I appreciate your attention in this, and I pray that this is maybe stimulated thought, maybe encourage you to go back. Maybe you come to a different conclusion than I do. That's okay. I would be very much interested to hear your perspective on these things. And so thank you for your attention, and I pray this was a blessing. God bless.